So here we are in part 2 of our holster making series, and in the last episode we made a paper um, paper layout for the holster. And what we're going to do now, of course, is we're going to turn that paper pattern into an actual finished leather holster. All right, so now it's time to trace it on the leather. So I marked the inside and the outside of the pattern to make sure I don't embarrass myself after cutting them out, because leather is expensive and we don't want to waste any because we made the pattern backwards, right? So this is about 5-ounce leather, which is a little bit light, except this is a light holster, and I'm going to be lining it with 3-ounce leather, so it's actually going to make for a much heavier holster when everything is said and done. And now I'm going to cut out the thinner piece of leather that I'm using for the liner. Same deal. Alright, next I'm going to go around with a stitching groover, and I'm going to cut a line that I'm going to use for my stitching, for putting the two pieces together and for sewing the back up. So this is a stitching groover, and it works pretty simple. Alright, I'm going to finish this up now right here. Alright, I don't want this holster to be too plain, so I'm going to basket weave stamp it. So I want to define an area for my decoration. So I'm going to take a pair of wing dividers, and I'm going to use those. Let's see. About there. Okay. I'm going to put one wing divider in my stitching groove, and I'm going to use that to trace a pattern right around the gun. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these lines a little bit more broad, and I'm going to use just this piece of steel. It's a little bit coned at the end. It's just a scrap that I put together. You don't have to buy all your tools. You can make quite a few of them. Alright, so I'm going to go down here. Okay, so now this area right in here, that's going to be where the basket stamping is going to go. Okay, so the next step in that process is I'm going to put a diagonal line across the holster like this. And that's where I'm going to do my stamping. And we'll show you how that goes. It's a diagonal line I just drew. That is going to be my guideline for doing the stamping. So I'm going to stamp above and below that line. Then I'll work my way across, and then I'll show you how the basket weave pattern actually starts to show up in here. Alright, so now that I'm doing the second row, you can see how the basket stamp begins to really take shape. Okay, so you see the basket is starting to take shape now. So we'll just get that finished up. And we'll be almost ready to start putting it together. Alright, the last thing I'm doing is I'm border stamping it. And that just really helps to eliminate your mistakes in a way, your overruns. And it gives it a kind of a decorative finish. Now, you guys have already figured out I am certainly not a great leather worker. But, alright, so there's the basket weave pattern. It's all stamped in. And now we're ready to start dyeing things up so we can put them together. Alright, so I'm just using Freibling's Pro Dye Black. Black is very forgiving, by the way. I would choose black as your first color if you've never made a holster. Alright, I'm going to put that aside. I'm just doing the smooth sides of both pieces of leather. And I got to do the edges too. Now some of these edges are going to end up being trimmed, and some of them are going to end up being burnished. So I'm going to do them all. The ones that will be trimmed we'll have to touch up after we trim them, of course. But that's not really a big deal, because of course most of this piece I'm doing now you're not going to see. It's going to be inside the holster. You'll only really be able to see the first few inches of it. Alright, that looks good. So I'll let everything dry up. I'll put another coat on the other one, and then we'll be ready to start gluing things together. Okay, I'm just using rubber cement, just regular rubber cement, contact cement, same thing. And I'm doing the flesh side of both pieces of leather. Okay, let that dry and we'll be good to go. Alright, I'm going to stitch the bottom and the top together, which besides gluing it will give a mechanical bond to these two pieces of leather, keep them from pulling apart, because they're going to be under a lot of pressure when we start bending it. So I do a variety of things. You can use punches, you can use all sorts of things. I'm going to use a stitching awl right here, which works pretty well for me. I'm just going to punch a bunch of these holes. Okay, now I'm going to start at the front corner because I want to finish up at the back. So I'm just going to thread a needle through, he said. There we go. Been doing mostly colonial projects lately, so I've been using a lot of linen thread, which is actually a lot thinner than this nylon stuff. Not that that's a good thing necessarily, but okay. So, you know, the way you do leather stitching is not the way you stitch cloth, right? We're doubling back through the same holes. Alright, hold on, because when it's tight, okay. So we like it tight, but when it's tight, just take a pair of pliers and pull a needle through. Okay. Alright, so with each thread, we're going to pull it good and tight. Right, so do the same thing now. We've got a needle on both ends. Right, I'm going to go back through through this side with one needle, and I'm going to go through the same hole back to the other side with the other needle. And because it's tight, I'll probably be doing this all the time. Just give it a little pull. There we go. Okay, and each time I go through, I'm going to pull those threads tight. And with the wax thread, it's going to lock itself together in that hole. Okay, so I'm just going to go all the way across. Okay, so I've got the bottom and the top sewed, and I've sewed everything on the belt loop right up to here, because that's where it's going to get attached. So I'll sew that down later on. Alright, so before we close everything up, there's one more step we got to take. We've got these cut edges that really look kind of raw. And what we're going to do is we're going to burnish them down. So I use gum trag, believe it or not, gum trag, that's how it's pronounced. And that's just a little sealant. I'm going to put that on here. Alright, now this is a burnishing tool. This is a hardwood one. There are all different kinds. You can get them bone. You can get them out of antler. And what you do is you're going to rub that in these grooves here. So I found the appropriate size groove. Wipe up the excess. Get the appropriate size groove on the tool. And I'm just going to work that back and forth right on here. And that's a burnishing tool. And it's kind of closing all that up, and it's rounding it over. And it's giving it a finished look, as if it's really all one piece of leather. Now I'm going to put this on the edge here. I have to go over it this way every now and then. I'm just going to go over that. And that's a good finished edge now. I'm going to let that dry, but that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to do the same thing all along here. And when that's done, then we can start actually closing this baby up. Okay, so I wet the flap at the bend here. And I'm just kind of working it once again with my burnishing tool, just to get that crease in it. Okay, so here we are. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the rubber cement, and I'm going to be going right here. This is the line where I stop stitching. Alright, so I'm going to cover that. And then I'm going to cover in this area right in here. Alright, and I'm going to slot that down. Glue to set. So I'm going to put a couple of clamps on here. Alright. So I'm just going to let that dry for a little bit, and then we're going to stitch that flap down, then we can close up the whole holster. Okay, so that's all secured now. Now, I don't know if I explained this before. If I did, rather than be redundant, you'll just never see this this part of the film. But the way you finish off leather stitching is not like you would do needle and thread on cloth. You don't tie a knot in it. What you do is you backstitch over the area you've already done. So these are already done stitches. And I'm just going to push this right back through. Okay, and obviously now we're getting very tight. So I'm going to push this back through a stitch I've already done. Pull it through. And now I'm going to go same way again. So the thing about this is there are now 4 pieces of thread going through that same hole, and they fill it up. Okay, it's getting really tight. There we go. So I'm going to have 4 pieces of thread going through each hole that I backstitch. So I'm going to do a few of these back, and then I'm just going to cut the thread off. Okay, welt's half on now. We got to put the other half. Before I fold this over, I'm going to spray the bend here with the shoe stretcher. It's a leather relaxer. It's really like an alcohol-based thing. What I want to do is let that soak in. This will evaporate very quickly, but it'll make this a little bit wet, and it'll allow it to bend the way we need it to without cracking. Okay, so what I'm going to do is cement up this area. All right. Let that leather relaxer do its work. Alright. Now, I want to get this as lined up as well as I can. Alright. And this. Okay, so we've glued up the holster now, and we just have to stitch it together. So, like I said, we're going through a lot of leather here with our stitching awl. But we're just going to have to go down the entire length of this and stitch it together, just like we've done before. Okay, we're all stitched up, and we're about 85% finished. It's looking like a holster now, except for that ugly, ugly back piece here. So what I'm going to do now is even that off with a knife, and then we'll dye it and we'll burnish it. Okay. Alright, let me dye that. Alright, so I'm getting this edge burnished. And what I'm doing with this is I'm taking beeswax. Right, this is the bottom of a beeswax candle. And I'm rubbing this on really good. Getting a layer of wax in there. And then I burnish that wax in. Alright, I'm going to let that harden a bit, and really, we're going to call that done. Now, there's things I would have done differently on this. I am not a pro holster maker, as you can probably tell, but it's not too bad. Okay, we're like 90%, 95% done now. The second and the last step in the process is to wet fit the holster to the gun. So I'm going to take this upstairs and I'm going to soak it in some water until it's good and wet. And a lot of people think you have to use like super hot water. Don't do that. Hot water will draw the oils out of the leather and just make it age faster. Okay, holster's wet. It's not sloppy wet. It is, as I like to say, just wet enough. So now I'm going to push the gun in. I'll get it all the way down. Okay, I've got it all the way in. And the plastic bag makes it a very tight fit. That's what I want. So it's going to dry a little bit big, so the gun will slide in and out very easily. We've got a well-made fitted holster here for the 1862 Police. It's all dried out. It's form fitted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just put a little bit of Neat's Foot compound, that's this stuff on it, to protect the leather. Right, put all the oils back in it and waterproof it after it's a little water bath there. Do not need much of this on. You don't want to soften the leather up with it. Okay, I'm just gonna Alright, I'm just going to let that dry. And, oops. Okay, going to let that dry, and when it's dried up, we will be ready to go. Okay, well, here's the completed holster.